All right, take your Bibles and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. You kids need to pay attention on this one. You ought to be familiar with this story. 1 Samuel chapter 17, and we're going to read down through a ways, and then we'll go ahead and start, and then we'll read the second section. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shokah, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shokah and Azekah in Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that were to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistines drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captains of their thousands, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to a trench at the host, was going forth to fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion the Philistines of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down, that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, I pray that you'll take and be with this message. I pray that you'll take and fill me with your Holy Spirit now and just speak through me. I pray that you'll take and bless the message. I pray that you'll use it for your honor and glory. I pray that as we study this amazing story, that we'll see things in it that we can apply spiritually to our lives. And in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Now, there's a lot in the passage with David and Goliath. And I want to just give kind of a basic look of some spiritual lessons tonight that we learn from this. First of all, the representants of the defying giant. This lion comes later in the chapter. It's a giant. But you have the armies of Israel on one side, you have the Philistines on the other, and you have a great valley in between them. And in that valley is where the battle begins. And the Philistines have their giant that they think is going to bring them victory. And their giant is sent out to win the battle and to make servants of the children of Israel. So they have their champion that they send out to defeat anyone that's brave enough to take them on and make servants of the children of Israel. Much is the same way of the Christian warfare today with the world. You have three enemies in the Christian warfare. Your enemy is the devil, the flesh, and the world. Now the world has their champions, and their champions will go against the Christian. And what they're trying to do is subdue the Christian, where the Christian can no longer stand against them. The world's fine as long as you serve them. They have no problem with the Christian as long as the Christian is submissive under their power. And that's what the Philistines are trying to do with the children of Israel. They're trying to get them to submit under their power. And the world is fine with you as long as you're not speaking up against them, as long as you're not preaching against their sin, as long as you're not trying to promote your ways on them. They're fine with you. The Christian that is subdued, the world is fine with. And many Christians are subdued by the world. They don't dare speak up against the world or say anything against them. And the world has its giants. I think sometimes of the giants of the world and their champions, and I would say that their political powers is their champion. You say political power? Yeah, political power. Political powers is very much the enemy of the church in many ways. You say, how so? How so would you say that? Well, you realize that Lester Roloff was shut down by political powers. And he had to, and when I see the church fighting against political powers, I look at Lester Roloff. Or I look at people in countries that are fighting against persecution, like in China or North Korea. You don't think political powers is the world's champion? Well, wait till you try to have church service in a place like North Korea. Political powers is the world's champion. Subdue and shut the mouths of the Christians. If the wicked can get in control of political powers, they will shut the churches down. We're somewhat seeing that in America because we're not used to that concept because America won its freedom for religion years ago, and we have enjoyed the benefits of having freedom of religion. But here we choose to take and worship and serve God the way that we would think that God would have us. And I'll tell you, Americans starting to see a little bit of persecution. And it's not huge, but it's a little bit. I mean, some of these churches in California and other states, they're trying to use the COVID-19 to shut their doors. Do you realize if they shut the doors the way the state is asking them to, they will no longer be able to continue doing the services that they've been doing? They're shutting down their bus ministries, they're shutting down their outreaches, they're shutting down their Baptist colleges, they're shutting everything out they're doing down. And the fact is if you close your doors, and I'm talking about these larger churches, these mega churches that has these huge bills. If they close their doors and people aren't coming and supporting the work, they're going to lose everything that they have. And the governments know that. Now the Lord will continue to use them, but what they're going to wind up being is just house churches, and they're going to wind up disbanding if they go for that long a time. So not only are they hindering small businesses with this, but they're shutting churches down with it. And you're seeing that across the country. Political powers is a giant that you need a champion to face. Lester Roloff, I considered him a champion. He faced the political powers of his time. He fought against them. He said, no, I won't. I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to let you stop me. I'm going to do my duty. And he did. And I know my brother Jeremy, he said the worst part about running a boys' home was dealing with the government. Always looking in. He constantly was afraid of the government coming in and shutting them down. Why? Because the government will not allow you to practice biblical principles when dealing with young men in detention. They won't. They won't allow you to. And so political powers, that's a large giant. And many, when they see a political giant, they're afraid. They're not even going to approach that battle. They're not even going to approach it. And for good reason. I mean, I know I don't want to go fighting against the government. But when it comes to them saying you cannot speak in the name of Jesus Christ and obeying God, we have to obey God rather than man. I remember when we were straight preaching up there in Kalispell, this lady came up to me and said, y'all have to shut down. And I said, no, we've been doing this 30 years. And I gave the spiel that I normally give. She goes, yeah, but I'm the mayor. I said, you have to shut down. Like, let me let you talk to my pastor. and you know what she did? She made us quit using the speaker. So we were using a great big speaker that would go 3 blocks. Been using it for years. Well, we had to quit using that. Had to start shouting. You say, well, we did. We went out the next week and was shouting. Just using our voice. You say, what is that? That's going against political power. When we went out there that next week, then I think every cop car in Kalispell was patrolling the park. They were ready to arrest us. That mayor was against us. Now, fortunately, there's some laws in this land where they had a city ordinance against a loudspeaker unless we paid them money. Go figure. And they had a city ordinance against a loudspeaker, but freedom of speech they couldn't go against. So I remember a cop come up to me and he rolled his window down. He said, are you using a loudspeaker when I was preaching? I said, no. He says, but I can hear you 3 blocks away. I said, good. He says, can you tone it down? I said, only if I have a loudspeaker. He just shook his head and went on. And that's the purpose, was for him to hear, so we had to be loud. And it was nice. I mean, you could bounce it across the bank and it'd echo on down that road. And if you lifted up your voice, you didn't have to have a loudspeaker there. You could, and we probably were more aggravating without the loudspeaker than what we were with it. They probably made things worse for themselves in reality. Because when you're in a loudspeaker, you have a calm tone. When you're shouting, it's not always that calm. You're actually having to shout. And but that's going against political powers. Then the other giant I see is technical media. Technical media. You realize that technical media has polluted the minds of the church in today? You say how? Well, through the movie industry, the internet industry. You can't even read the news without all these pop-ups popping up. That is not something you want to see. And how do you go against that? How do you fight that? How do you even approach fighting it? With that, you have in the entertainment, technical media, news media. You know what I like the most about President Trump? What I like the most about him is he calls the news media what they are. I saw one out there where this reporter comes up to him, and he just got off the jet and said, asking a question about Biden. And he goes, well, Biden is a crook. Biden. All right, whatever. He says, Biden's a crook. And you're a crook because you won't report it. And he stuck his finger around and said, you're a crook and you won't report it. And then he turned around and he just walked off, shaking his head. I sat down like, well, now that guy's got character. He's going against a giant there. And he's gone against Facebook. He's gone against Twitter. He's gone against all these media outlets. That's a man facing a giant. And you need that sometimes. You need somebody that will stand up to the giants. And these are the world's giants. You have their giant of entertainment. You have their giant of false religion. And I'll tell you, you need some people to stand up to the false religions. Call it for what it is. Name them for what they are. And very few Christians, they try to take and very few Christians will stand up against the giants. Most of them try to go through the Christian life without causing any waves or without any conflict. Well, that's not what we see with David. The giants need to be faced. Look at verse 29. And David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? There is a cause for the Christian warfare. There is a cause to stand up against the world and their giants. And they're going to take and try to suppress the church into serving them, into folding into their ways. And somebody has to stand up to them. Somebody has to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. This is not biblical. This is not what we stand for. We're at enmity with this. I'll tell you one that's gotten the church is the music industry has polluted our churches. You know, somebody needs to stand up to that. Somebody. I remember when I was a kid, there was a guy that did a program for a youth group that I went to. His name was Danny Castle. And Danny Castle put a program on showing the dangers of rock music and Christian rock music and how Christian rock music came out of the heavy metal. I never forgot that night and the things that he showed us. I never forgot it. Now, I'll grant it, it's not something for young kids, but it was something, I guess I was 16, 17 years old, 15, 16, 17 years old right in there when I went to that thing. But I never forgot what that guy did. And he was trying to stand up to a giant that has just flowed through. I wonder if anybody out there is going through and fighting that giant today. How many people really put on a good display against modern music in churches, the Christian rock, and showing it and exposing it for the pollutions and the effect that the pollutions have on our young people? You know what kind of damage that music does to young people? I mean, I have to listen to this junk at work, and I hear what's said, and I will see the reactions to it. I mean, that stuff's all about fornication. It's about adultery. It's about the devil having control of your spirit and your emotions. I mean, when they're playing that rock and roll music, I'll tell you, your nerves are on end. There's a bad spirit with that stuff. And they're bringing that junk into the churches. Somebody needs to stand up for a giant. There's a cause. There's a cause for it. Somebody needs to stand up to the entertainment industry. You know, the kids watch this stuff. I used to have that Netflix thing. It was a cheap way to have TV, and you could pick and let them watch what they want to watch. But I mean, they came across this one program, where they made Jesus Christ a sodomite. And it was Netflix that put it on. It was a Netflix original thing. And I saw that thing. I was like, you know what? Well, I didn't watch it. I read about it. And I said, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I haven't had Netflix since. I canceled it as a boycott. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, because they all have junk. I went to Disney Plus. I thought it was a little safer. And Disney Plus has junk in it too. I mean, right? Now, I mean, you can't get around the junk that the world's entertainment industry has. You say, how do you get across? Well, if every Christian shot their TV and said "Phooey" on it, maybe, but they probably still keep going. You know, I doubt it would stop them. I mean, you know, but you have to stand up to them and call it for what it is. It's wickedness. It's wickedness. Somebody has to stand up and fight. There's a cause. The other thing I see in the passage, and we haven't gotten there yet, when David goes to fight him, let's pick up with 31 and read on a little bit farther here. It says, "And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine and fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and the uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. David said, Moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he assayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even his scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Now we see the character or the qualifications of the person that can face the giant. And there's some things about David's character that we see that shows what God looks at and blesses in the individual that can face the giants of this world. Now, David was not the choice pick. He's a young boy. He's a youth. You picture somebody maybe 15, 16 years old, 14, 15, 16, not quite full grown. He's watching the sheep. He's the youngest. Only the 3 elders of Jesse's 7 boys are out there in the battle, meaning David had to be pretty young at this time. And the qualifications I see in this is, first of all, he has a character to know that he cannot fight on somebody else's armor. He cannot fight with somebody else's armor. When it comes to your Christian warfare, you have to fight those battles according to what God has taught you. In other words, one of the things Brother Bemis told me, he said, you have to prepare. He said, you cannot prepare my messages. You cannot preach my messages in this church when I was filling in for him. And I said, you cannot preach Dr. Ruckman's messages. And he said, because I preach Dr. Ruckman's messages, so you cannot. And then he told me, he says, unless you learn to get something from the Word of God yourself from the Lord, you will never make it as a preacher. You will never make it as a preacher. In other words, he's saying, you have to learn how to fight the warfare in what the Lord teaches you. What the Lord teaches you. And every Christian is taught differently how to fight a warfare. What works for me in the warfare may not work for you. I will say this. The way I have handled things since my wife died, and going forward, the way I've gone forward, if I was to give counsel to somebody going through the same thing, I would not tell them to do the same things that I've done. You say you want it? No, I want it. I'll tell you why. Some of the things that I've done has just been steps of faith because the Lord showed me that I should go forward through my prayer. But it's not a practical step of wisdom. Some of the things that I've done. And I recognize that and I know that. So to sit there and think that everybody that goes through the same thing that I do should do it exactly the way I did it, I think would not be wise for me to give that counsel. It may not work out for them the way it's worked out for me. Sometimes the Lord will get you through things and you have to fight those things the way the Lord's prepared you to fight them. But just because the Lord blesses you in the way you're doing it does not mean that's the way every individual is going to do it. Not everybody that kills the giant uses a sling with a stone. Later, Some of David's mighty men has to fight Goliath's brothers. They don't use a sling with a stone, but they still defeat the giants. And the point is, you have to learn to fight the Christian warfare according to how God prepares you and molds you and trains you. One of the things Dr. Ruckman used to tell us is, do not try to be me in the ministry. The biggest mistake I see with many people from PBI is they try to be Dr. Ruckman, and they're not called to be him. He had a unique ministry in defending the King James Bible in a way as a old military person that came from way back that you could not mimic. And if you try to mimic, you will not be respected or heard. So I've never tried to be Dr. Ruckman. Now, I'm sure he had some influence on my life, but I've never tried to be him. And that's something you can't do. You want to know how you spot somebody that is trying to wear someone else's armor? All they can do is quote and teach the person that trained them. They never come up with anything of their own. That's wearing somebody else's armor. You can't do that. You're not going to be able to win when you do that. It's like this. Everybody, when they shoot, has a little bit different of a characteristic the way they shoot. Me and my brother Nathan, we shoot a little bit different. If I pick up Nathan's rifle and I go out and shoot it, I'll be a little bit off target. If Nathan picks up my rifle and he looks through it, he says my scope is off, is twisted, and my things. And the reason being is we hold our gun different. We hold it different. So I cannot pick up his rifle and just go out and be dead on. I have to use my own. I am more comfortable with my own because I've proved them. I've used them. I'm not comfortable with somebody else's. That's the same thing with the Christian warfare. When it comes to fighting the giant, you're going to have to use what God has shown you from your weapon. And you cannot always use what God's shown me. You have to use what God showed you. So he could not use Saul's armor or weapon. Now, the other thing I noticed about David was he was very obedient to his father. He was obedient to his father. He had the characteristic where he was about his father's business, doing the things his father told him. You know, if you're going to fight a giant and have any victory, you're going to have to learn to be about the business of doing what your father tells you. I'm talking about God the Father here. If you're not about His business, obedient to Him, you're never going to be in the position where you're able to fight the giant. Because the Father is the one that put him in the place of the sheep, where he learned the weapons of his warfare against the bear and the lion, protecting the sheep. And the Father also sent him out to feed others in the place of warfare. And that's much like the Christian life. The other thing I see is David's one who will put himself in harm's way for the benefit of the sheep. He puts himself in harm's way for the benefit of the sheep. You know why it provoked David so bad when this giant come out? Because he sees him defying Israel. That wasn't a personal defiance against David that got David riled up. He was defying the armies of Israel. So David was willing to go out and put himself in harm's way for the sake of the armies of Israel. Just like he was willing to put himself in harm's way for the sake of the sheep. I have one message that I preach on David, and maybe I'll preach this next week because it's out of this passage. And it has to do with the difference between the heart of a shepherd and the heart of a soldier. We're supposed to be both, but the two different views are very different. The next thing is David cannot see the size of the giant. He can only see the size of the Lord. The size of the giant meant nothing to David. The giant spear meant nothing. All he saw is, this is what the Lord can do. So the giant did not look as scary to David as he did the others. Now the others, they're scared to death. Here's Saul, probably the tallest man in the army, too afraid to go fight the giant. Why? Because all they can see is the size of the giant. They don't see the size of the Lord. And what you need is somebody that can see what the Lord can do and that's not worried about the giants of this world. Yeah, the giants of this world, they're scary if all you have is your eyes on them. And you know what you need to be able to be a giant slayer? You need to have your eyes on the Lord. You need to have your eyes on Him. Then what I see about David is he's one who's willing to be used of God as he is. In other words, David doesn't sit there and look at his inadequacies. He doesn't sit there and look at his staff and his sling and says, nope, I'm outgunned. I'm going to step back. I'm outsized, outgunned. I'm going to step back. Yeah, he's inadequate for this fight in his own might. But he says, okay, I'll take what I have, my staff and my sling, and I'll go fight for the Lord as what I am. You know why a lot of Christians don't face the giants? Because they don't think they have the ability to do it, which they don't. But if any person in the Lord's hand has a mighty ability, because it's the Lord doing it through him. And that's the last thing you see about David. He knows that the victory only comes through the Lord's might. It only comes through the Lord's might. He faces Goliath in the might of the Lord, not in his own might. He's just a vessel being used. And he allows God to use that vessel. Every Christian who fights the warfare just has to be the vessel of who they are to fight the Lord's warfare. Say, I don't have the ability to do that. That's fine. Let the Lord have what abilities you have and then go fight the warfare and see what He does. He can do something much more amazing than you think He can. And here you have the story that goes through the ages, a shepherd boy taking out a giant. Why? Because the efforts that shepherd boy put forth was used of God. And it's God that killed Goliath. It wasn't the shepherd boy, it was God. But He used what little the shepherd boy knew. A sling. Kaboom. Nathaniel asked me, can a 22 kill a wolf? I'm like, yeah, if it hits them right. If it hits them right. It says, can a BB gun? Now that takes a miracle from the Lord. There was a guy out in Fortine. He went out. He had what he thought was a skunk in the chicken coop. Chickens were acting up. So he took his 410 shotgun out there and he opened it, and there was a sow grizzly with cubs in his chicken coop. And he was running from it, and the sow came out and charged him. So he swung back with the 410 shotgun and shot behind him. Now, a 410 shotgun's about the smallest shotgun you can get. That's a squirrel shotgun, basically. Squirrel quail, small bird. And he shot as he was running. One pellet went up the nostril into the brain of the grizzly and killed it as it was chasing. It's recorded as the smallest caliber gun that's ever killed a grizzly. It was that 410 shotgun. You say, what is that? That is God's grace on somebody. That's God's grace on somebody. For all practical purposes, that is not the gun to use on a grizzly. It's just not. You don't go that direction. All right. For all practical purposes, you don't fight a giant with a sling shot and a stone. But when the Lord is behind it, you can see something done that is a miracle. Now, the question is, will you take what you have and allow the Lord to use you to fight the world's giants? You might be amazed what He can do. All right, let's stop there and take some prayer requests.